into some of the darkest hours in our history. Great issues still lie ahead, and at this time it is fitting that the British nation should listen once again to the words of Mr. Churchill.
5 years ago, I promised you blood, toil, tears, and sweat. And your untiring response brought us, in the end, victory over Germany. Today, we still have tears. Not so many, thank God. But the conquest of Japan, hand in hand with our American allies, is a formidable undertaking which we must and will see through to the end. And we must still look forward, alas, to blood and sweat. We have a terrific task ahead of us. We have a shattered world around us, and we must help to rebuild it. We must strive for a sane and just peace which will save us all and our children from the constant fear of war. Our trade and industry must be restored to a sound peacetime footing so as to ensure steady employment for all. We must strive to give everybody greater security against poverty, unemployment, sickness, and old age. Above all, we must tackle the housing problem with the same drive which we put into our war effort. Up till now, nearly all the builders have been at the wars. Up till now, those at home have been mainly absorbed in bomb repairs. But we are making good headway, and everything in human power will be done. Here are tremendous tasks. They cannot be solved by glib promises, but only by national effort in which all of us must take our share. Every man and woman must be prepared to put his best effort into the job, because it is only by hard work, enterprise, energy, and teamwork that we can win. That is why I am asking today for the support of all men and women of goodwill. During the war, I rested my trust in the British people. Time after time, I warned them of the dangers ahead, and they never failed. Once again, now, today, I must tell you that in spite of all our victories, a rough road lies ahead. What a shame it would be, and what a folly, to add to our load the bitter quarrels with which the extreme socialists are eager to convulse and exploit these critical years. For the sake of the country and of your own happiness, I call upon you to march with me under the banner of freedom towards the beacon lights of national prosperity and honor, which must ever be our guide.
Winston Churchill was not just a leader of Britain. He was a voice that echoed through the darkest hours of human history. Born in 1874 at Blenheim Palace into an aristocratic family with deep political roots, Churchill's early years were marked by struggle and rebellion. A mediocre student who later excelled at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, he launched a career that combined military service with journalism, witnessing wars in Cuba, India, Sudan, and South Africa. These experiences shaped his worldview and toughened his resolve. Churchill did not just read history, he lived it. Winston Churchill's early life is a powerful study in the shaping of character and the forging of resilience through hardship and ambition. Born into British aristocracy in 1874, Churchill grew up within the walls of privilege. But his relationship with his parents, especially his distant father, was emotionally detached. This lack of warmth at home perhaps ignited a fire in young Winston, a desire to prove himself, to be seen, to leave a mark. He was not a brilliant student by conventional standards. His school reports were average, and he struggled in traditional academic settings. Yet his brilliance lay elsewhere, in rhetoric, imagination, and an unshakable confidence in his destiny. After several attempts, he entered the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst and graduated 8th in his class, beginning his career as a cavalry officer. It was in the army that Churchill found not only discipline but also adventure, action, and a taste for danger. He volunteered for active duty in places like India, the Sudan, and Cuba. His time as a war correspondent in South Africa, where he was captured and made a daring escape from a Boer prison, turned him into a national hero and brought him fame long before his first major political position. His bravery and audacity became part of the Churchill legend. But Churchill was not satisfied with heroism alone. He wanted power and purpose. Transitioning into politics, Churchill was elected as a member of Parliament in 1900. At first he was a conservative, but he shocked many by crossing the floor and joining the Liberals in 1904. This bold move was rooted in principles rather than party loyalty. He opposed conservative protectionist economic policies and supported free trade. This kind of conviction would define Churchill's entire career. He was not afraid to stand alone to oppose the current when he believed it necessary. He quickly rose through the political ranks, holding several key positions, including Home Secretary and First Lord of the Admiralty. Even then, he was often criticized for being too ambitious, too outspoken, too dramatic. But he had vision. He modernized the Royal Navy, supported social reform, and pushed Britain into the age of industrial warfare. These early experiences, both his military exploits and his political battles, helped forge a man who was unafraid of controversy and drawn to the front lines, whether in battle or in Parliament. What set Churchill apart even in those formative years was his grasp of history and oratory. He believed that great speeches could shape nations, that language was as potent a weapon as any sword. He read voraciously, wrote extensively, and began building the intellectual and rhetorical arsenal that he would later use to inspire millions. Despite facing professional setbacks, such as the disastrous Gallipoli campaign in World War I, Churchill never allowed defeat to define him. He accepted blame, learned lessons, and waited for the right moment to return stronger. The grit and complexity of his early life prepared him for the storms to come. The making of Winston Churchill was not a smooth ascent. It was marked by hardship, criticism, and self-reinvention. But through it all, he emerged as a man uniquely prepared for the darkest hour of the 20th century. His entry into politics at the turn of the 20th century was anything but smooth. He switched parties, opposed popular policies, and often stood alone in Parliament. Yet, it was this fierce independence and foresight that defined his greatness. During the 1930s, as Hitler rose to power and most of Europe turned a blind eye, Churchill sounded the alarm. Branded a warmonger and sidelined from politics, he waited in what would later be known as his wilderness years, watching a storm gather over the continent. When war broke out in 1939 and Neville Chamberlain's policy of appeasement failed, Churchill was called back to lead, not because he was universally liked, but because Britain needed a man who could stare down the abyss. Churchill's rise through British politics in the early 20th century was nothing short of extraordinary, marked by bold decisions, sweeping reforms, and controversial stands. After his election to Parliament in 1900, he quickly distinguished himself with his sharp intellect and formidable oratory. Yet what truly shocked the political world was his dramatic defection from the Conservative Party to the Liberals in 1904. Many viewed this as opportunistic, but Churchill's motives were deeply ideological. He opposed the Conservatives' protectionist policies, believing instead in free trade, individual liberty, and social progress. As a liberal, he flourished. He became president of the Board of Trade, where he helped introduce reforms to reduce unemployment, improve labor conditions, and lay the groundwork for Britain's welfare state. He championed the minimum wage, unemployment insurance, and labor exchanges, bold steps that reflected a modern and compassionate vision for government's role in society. This phase of Churchill's career revealed a man unafraid to break with tradition, to challenge the status quo, and to advocate for the working class despite his aristocratic background. Churchill's early ministerial career also saw his entry into military affairs when he became First Lord of the Admiralty in 1911. He was determined to modernize Britain's naval power in anticipation of future conflicts, especially with Germany. He championed the transition from coal-powered to oil-powered ships and expanded the Royal Navy. His foresight in naval preparedness would later prove critical in both world wars. However, his ambition also led to risks. During World War I, he pushed hard for the Dardanelles campaign and the invasion of Gallipoli, hoping to break the stalemate on the Western Front. The campaign was a disaster, costing thousands of Allied lives and leading to his resignation from the Admiralty. Many believed his political career was over, yet Churchill, ever the fighter, enlisted in the army and served on the Western Front. This period of disgrace and reflection taught him humility, yet it also hardened his resolve. He returned to politics later with a renewed sense of purpose. Throughout these years, Churchill demonstrated a willingness to take bold risks, to absorb crushing failures, and to rebuild. His path was never straight or easy, but it was forged with conviction, courage, and an unwavering belief in his destiny as a leader of consequence. In 1940, as Nazi forces swept through Europe, Churchill became Prime Minister. Britain stood alone. France had fallen. America remained distant. The skies were dark, but Churchill's voice was unflinching. His speeches were not just rhetoric, they were fuel for the nation's soul. "Ye shall fight on the beaches," he thundered. "At their finest hour," he declared. These were not hollow words. They were lifelines thrown to a nation on the brink. He rallied a battered Britain to stand firm during the Blitz, and through sheer force of will and unyielding spirit, he kept the idea of victory alive. The outbreak of World War II marked the most defining period in Winston Churchill's life, a time when he transitioned from a seasoned but sidelined politician to the undisputed leader of a nation under siege. In 1939, when Germany invaded Poland and Britain declared war, Churchill was appointed First Lord of the Admiralty once again. However, it was in May 1940, following the disastrous failure of the Allied campaign in Norway and the resignation of Neville Chamberlain, that Churchill was asked to form a government. On May 10, 1940, as Hitler's forces were sweeping across Europe, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. Many within his own party doubted him. He had a long record of controversy, failures, and changing political affiliation. But at this darkest hour, it was Churchill's voice that galvanized the British people. Churchill delivered some of the most powerful speeches in history during this time, warning of the hardships to come, but refusing to entertain the idea of surrender. He spoke not just to Parliament, but to every household in Britain through radio broadcasts, lifting spirits and reinforcing resolve. "We shall fight on the beaches," he said. "We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." These words became a rallying cry, not just for Britons, but for all who opposed tyranny. Under Churchill's leadership, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany for more than a year, enduring the relentless aerial bombardment of the Blitz. During that time, the Royal Air Force defended the skies, while Churchill coordinated diplomacy to bring America closer into the war, all the while strengthening Britain's alliances across the Commonwealth. Despite the destruction, fear, and uncertainty that gripped the country, Churchill's determination never wavered. His ability to articulate the stakes of the war as a battle between freedom and tyranny gave moral clarity to a terrifying global conflict. He understood the power of words to mobilize a people and shape history. Churchill also demonstrated strategic vision. He cultivated the Grand Alliance with Roosevelt and Stalin, recognizing that the defeat of Hitler required coordination among the major Allied powers, even those ideologically opposed like the Soviet Union. Churchill's wartime leadership was not without criticism, and he made controversial decisions such as the bombing of German cities and the handling of colonial territories. But overall, his leadership was the glue that held Britain together during its most perilous years. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, and when it came, he delivered with extraordinary resolve, unmatched oratory, and a singular belief in the righteousness of his nation's cause. Churchill's greatness wasn't just in his defiance, it was in his strategy and diplomacy. His alliance with Franklin D. Roosevelt and the reluctant collaboration with Joseph Stalin forged the Grand Alliance, which proved crucial in turning the tide of the war. He balanced ideologies, negotiated under pressure, and constantly reminded the world that freedom, no matter the cost, was worth defending. Churchill's speeches were not merely words, they were weapons, morale boosters, and strategic tools in Britain's fight against fascism. With each address, he carefully constructed a bridge between the government and the people, ensuring that the public felt informed, included, and, above all, inspired. His oratory during the early years of World War II became legendary. He did not sugarcoat the perilous situation Britain faced, but he infused even the grimmest forecasts with a steadfast optimism. When France fell to the Nazis in 1940 and Britain stood alone, Churchill told his people they would never surrender. His speeches didn't just reach the ears of citizens, they stirred the souls of millions, uniting them in purpose. These moments, broadcast over the radio and printed in newspapers, fortified public spirit during the Blitz, and reminded Britons that their courage mattered as much as any soldier's weapon. What made Churchill's oratory particularly powerful was the blend of classical education, deep historical awareness, and personal conviction. Drawing inspiration from past British victories, ancient Rome, and biblical imagery, Churchill spoke with a moral clarity that gave meaning to sacrifice. He didn't just say that victory was possible. He made people believe it was inevitable if they stood firm. He carefully chose phrases that would echo through time. This was their finest hour, the blood, toil, tears, and sweat, another few when referring to the RAF pilots in the Battle of Britain. These were not spontaneous words, they were the results of meticulous preparation. Churchill would draft, revise, and rehearse his speeches to perfection, understanding their potential impact on national morale and global perception. Beyond their emotional power, Churchill's speeches were also strategically targeted. He aimed not only to fortify British resolve, but to send signals across the Atlantic to the United States. He recognized early on that Britain could not win the war alone. His rhetoric laid the groundwork for fostering public support in America for aiding Britain, leading to policies like Lend-Lease and eventually full U.S. involvement in the war. His cadence, imagery, and message resonated deeply with the American people, drawing on shared values of liberty, democracy, and resistance to tyranny. Churchill's mastery of language helped transform public sentiment and ensured that his voice reached well beyond the English Channel. Churchill's speeches remain among the most influential in modern history, not just for their content, but for their timing. He knew when to speak and when to listen. In moments of crisis, his words became a source of strength, guidance, and defiance. He turned speeches into an art form, using them to shape events, not merely respond to them. Churchill's wartime rhetoric is remembered not only because it was eloquent, but because it was deeply necessary. He spoke for a generation whose survival depended on hope, grit, and the belief that freedom was worth every ounce of struggle. But victory in war did not translate into political survival. In 1945, the British public voted him out, weary from years of war. Still, Churchill's voice remained potent. In 1946, in Fulton, Missouri, he warned of a new danger, an Iron Curtain descending across Europe. With that, he became a prophet of the Cold War, once again urging the world to stay vigilant against tyranny. Winston Churchill's legacy was not confined to his wartime leadership. It extended far into the post-war era, where he played a key role in shaping the new geopolitical landscape. Even after the guns fell silent in 1945, Churchill recognized that a new struggle was beginning, not against fascism, but against the spread of communism and the emerging Soviet threat. His 1946 Iron Curtain speech in Fulton, Missouri, was a defining moment in articulating the ideological divide that would shape the Cold War. While some at the time viewed it as alarmist, history later validated Churchill's foresight. He warned that the Soviet Union was expanding its influence across Eastern Europe, suppressing democratic institutions and spreading totalitarianism. His call for a united Western response laid the intellectual groundwork for future alliances such as NATO and encouraged transatlantic cooperation as a bulwark against aggression. Churchill's vision for peace was not merely reactive. He advocated for a post-war order grounded in unity, democracy, and economic collaboration. He was a vocal proponent of European integration, famously declaring that Europe must build a kind of United States of Europe. This was particularly remarkable coming from a British statesman whose country had traditionally remained distant from continental politics. Churchill's support for cooperation across borders reflected his understanding that peace would only be sustainable through unity and mutual interest. While Britain would later struggle with its role in the evolving European project, Churchill's early advocacy highlighted his broader commitment to stability and rebuilding after the devastation of war. His second term as Prime Minister from 1951 to 1955 further demonstrated Churchill's ability to lead in peacetime, though age and health increasingly became challenges. Still, his government managed to oversee key domestic reforms and maintain Britain's global stature during a time of rapid change. The post-war world was shifting dramatically, colonial empires were crumbling, nuclear arms were proliferating, and a new generation of leaders was emerging. Yet Churchill, even in his final years in office, continued to be a symbol of continuity and resilience. His influence helped Britain navigate the complexities of the early Cold War and retain its voice on the world stage, despite the nation's declining imperial power. Churchill's personal stature and international relationships gave him a unique role as a bridge between past and present, war and peace. He cultivated strong bonds with world leaders across the political spectrum, earning him respect even among those who disagreed with his policies. His lifelong dedication to public service, whether as a war correspondent, soldier, parliamentarian, or prime minister, demonstrated a relentless pursuit of duty. He once said, "A politics is not a game, it is an earnest business." That sentiment shaped his every action and helped solidify his place as one of the most significant figures in global history. As the Cold War deepened and new challenges emerged, Churchill's calls for unity, strength, and moral clarity continued to echo well beyond his time in office. Winston Churchill was not a flawless man. He held controversial views and made grave mistakes. But history remembers him because when civilization teetered on the edge, he stood firm. His legacy is not just a victory, but a vision. He showed us what leadership looks like when hope is scarce and the odds seem impossible. Winston Churchill's legacy is inseparable from his unparalleled command of language, a tool he wielded not only to rally nations but to shape the course of history itself. His speeches during the Second World War did more than inspire. They anchored morale in the darkest moments of global conflict. Churchill understood the power of words to create resolve where despair threatened to take root. His speeches, such as "How We Shall Fight on the Beaches" and "Their Finest Hour," were not merely oratory, they were instruments of survival and resistance. When Britain stood virtually alone against the Nazi threat, it was Churchill's voice that gave the people courage to persevere. He knew how to evoke emotion while anchoring his message in clarity and purpose, using rhythm, repetition, and vivid imagery that embedded his words in the hearts of millions. His oratory was not for performance. It was an act of leadership in its purest form, wielded to inspire collective strength. His ability to speak with both grandeur and grit was no accident. Churchill was a student of history and language from a young age, deeply influenced by classical literature and British traditions. He believed that a leader must possess not only political acumen, but also rhetorical precision. In every speech, Churchill combined historical context with contemporary urgency, often drawing upon Britain's past glories to stir its future ambitions. But he also adapted his tone to fit the moment, whether speaking before Parliament, broadcasting to the public, or addressing foreign allies. He saw speeches as a moral instrument, guiding people not just in what to do, but in what to believe. Even his fiercest critics acknowledged the unmatched weight of his words, and generations since have studied his speeches as examples of rhetorical mastery. Churchill's language also carried a profound sense of responsibility. He did not seek to shield the public from harsh truths. Rather, he invited them to confront reality with courage and honor. His honesty in the face of catastrophe set him apart. He told the British people in 1940 that he had nothing to offer but blood, toils, tears, and sweat, setting a tone of somber determination. That authenticity, paired with his stirring delivery, made him a beacon of trust during uncertain times. Churchill's words did not promise easy victory. They promised resilience, unity, and dignity in the face of hardship. In doing so, he created not just speeches, but shared experiences, bonding a nation through language at a time when physical and psychological distances felt insurmountable. Moreover, his influence on international audiences extended far beyond Britain's borders. American citizens who heard Churchill's addresses recognized a kindred spirit in his defense of freedom and democracy. His speeches helped lay the cultural foundation for the Anglo-American alliance that became critical to defeating tyranny. Churchill used his rhetorical gifts to bridge continents, fostering solidarity that transcended politics. Even in peacetime, his words held weight in diplomatic circles, emphasizing the values of cooperation and mutual respect. Through speeches, he not only built morale, but constructed the intellectual architecture of global partnerships that would endure through the Cold War and beyond. Churchill also had a flair for language that transcended politics and reached into literature. Awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953, not for fiction, but for his mastery of historical and biographical narrative, Churchill proved that political speech could rise to the level of literary art. His writings and speeches are taught not only in political science courses, but in literature. At classrooms around the world, they demonstrate how great oratory is not simply about volume or style, but about substance, about making ideas resonate and endure. Through speech, Churchill created a legacy not just of policies and decisions, but of meaning. Ultimately, Churchill's oratory was an extension of his character, bold, imaginative, resilient, and deeply committed to the principles of freedom and human dignity. In a world threatened by dictatorship, it was his voice that embodied democratic defiance. The power of his words did not fade with the end of the war or with his departure from office. Instead, they continue to echo in moments of crisis, reminding future generations of the role that language can play in preserving civilization. His speeches serve not only as historical records, but as enduring calls to courage and unity in the face of adversity.